Anxiety is one of those things that has become so common today that people almost treat it like background noise. You wake up and it's there. You go through your day and it lingers in the corners of your mind. Sometimes it spikes when you have to perform, meet someone new, or take a risk. Other times it just sits there quietly, weighing on you without you even realizing it. The strange thing about anxiety is that it's both invisible and undeniable. From the outside, you may look completely fine. You're holding a conversation, you're getting your work done, you're smiling when people expect you to smile. But inside, it feels like you're walking through a storm. Your heart races, your thoughts spiral, your body feels tense. And no one can see it. That loneliness, that sense of carrying a weight no one else understands, makes anxiety even harder. Now, let's understand where anxiety comes from. It's not just random fear. Anxiety is your nervous system doing its job too well. Your brain is wired to keep you alive, so it scans for threats. Thousands of years ago, those threats were predators or starvation. Today, those threats are things like failure, rejection, financial stress, or losing social status. The brain doesn't know the difference between a tiger in the bushes and an email from your boss. It just knows threat, and it fires up the fight or flight response. That adrenaline surge is useful when you need to run from a tiger. But when you're sitting in a meeting or lying in bed, it feels suffocating. The mistake most people make is thinking anxiety is purely mental. It's not. Anxiety is physiological. It's in your body. Your thoughts race because your nervous system is on overdrive. Your heart pounds because your sympathetic nervous system is activated. You feel restless because your body is primed for movement. This is why telling someone, just relax, doesn't work. Anxiety is not a choice, it's a state your body enters. Fixing anxiety, then, is not about erasing it. You can't remove a survival mechanism. It's about retraining your nervous system, teaching it that not every situation requires fight or flight. Breath work, meditation, physical exercise, these are meditation, physical exercise, these are not. They are ways of calming the body so the mind can follow. When you slow your breath, when you ground yourself, when you physically discharge energy, you send signals to your nervous system that the threat is over. The brain listens to the body. If you want to tame your anxiety, you can't just think differently. You need to regulate differently. But let's zoom out. Why does anxiety feel so rampant today? Why are people more anxious now than ever before? Part of it has to do with the world we live in. We are constantly bombarded by stimulation. Notifications, endless news, comparison through social media. Our nervous systems were never designed for this much input. Imagine your ancestors walking through a forest. They might see a predator once every few days. Now, your brain sees threats every 5 minutes, a text you haven't answered, a bill you forgot to pay, a headline about disaster, a picture of someone more successful than you. Each one might be small, but together they overwhelm the system. Anxiety today is not just about survival, it's about overstimulation. And this is where cheap dopamine comes in. Because when your nervous system is overwhelmed, you crave relief. You want to feel better, so you reach for the easiest hit of pleasure available. Scroll TikTok, open Instagram, watch another video, eat junk food, play a game, porn. These things give you a quick spike of dopamine, the brain chemical that signals reward. For a moment, you feel relief. But then it fades, and your anxiety is still there, maybe even worse because you wasted time. Cheap dopamine is like scratching an itch with poison ivy. It soothes you for a second, but makes the problem worse in the long run. Cheap dopamine also hijacks your motivation. See, the brain evolved dopamine not just for pleasure but for survival. Dopamine drives you to hunt, to explore, to build, to chase goals. But when you give your brain instant dopamine all the time, it loses the drive for long-term reward. Why would your brain put in the effort to build a business, improve your health, or deepen a relationship when it can get the same chemical rush from scrolling or swiping? Over time, this rewires your motivation. You stop chasing real growth because the cheap hits are always available. This is where the idea of the 1% mindset comes in. The people who rise above are not always smarter, stronger, or luckier. They are the ones who stop feeding their brain cheap dopamine and start training it to chase real rewards. They delay gratification. They focus on the long game. They endure discomfort instead of numbing it. That's what separates the people who are controlled by their impulses from the people who create meaningful lives. Now, let's connect this to the Red Pill conversation. The Red Pill movement has become controversial because it highlights uncomfortable truths about gender, power, and attraction. Some of it is toxic, but some of it resonates because it speaks to real struggles men face. For decades, men have been told to suppress their emotions, to be strong, to be providers. At the same time, traditional roles are collapsing. Many men feel lost, rejected, unvalued. They see women empowered and celebrated, and instead of feeling inspired, they feel invisible. This invisibility breeds resentment, and that resentment fuels online communities where bitterness grows. But underneath the red pill anger is pain. Men want to feel valuable. They want to feel like they matter, and the truth is, men are good. Not perfect, not always healthy, but fundamentally good. Most men want to provide, to protect, to love, to contribute. But in a world that doesn't affirm that, they retreat into bitterness or distraction. This is where cheap dopamine takes over again. Men who feel unworthy bury themselves in porn, video games, endless scrolling. They drown their pain in stimulation instead of facing it. And the more they do this, the weaker they feel, the more anxious they become, the more disconnected they are from real purpose. So how do we fix this? How do we help men move from anxiety, resentment, and cheap dopamine into strength, purpose, and love? The first step is honesty. You can't fix what you refuse to see. Men need to admit they are struggling, admit they feel lost, admit they are numbing themselves. This honesty is not weakness, it's the foundation of growth. Because once you name the problem, you can start to work on it. The second step is discipline. Not the macho discipline of pretending you're a machine, but the real discipline of choosing what you feed your brain. Dopamine is not the enemy. You need dopamine. The question is whether you will get it from cheap hits or meaningful goals. Every time you resist the easy hit and choose the harder path, you are rewiring your brain. Every time you sit with your anxiety instead of numbing it, you are teaching your nervous system resilience. Every time you pursue long-term growth instead of instant gratification, you are reclaiming control of your life. The third step is connection. Men are starving for brotherhood, for mentors, for communities where they can be real. Too many men live in isolation, carrying silent battles. Anxiety thrives in isolation. Shame thrives in isolation. Cheap dopamine thrives in isolation. But when men come together, when they share openly, when they push each other, they begin to heal. They see they are not alone. They realize their struggles are human, not proof of weakness. And the final step is service. Purpose doesn't come from self-indulgence, it comes from contribution. When you use your strength to help others, when you create something valuable, when you stand for something bigger than yourself, your anxiety begins to shrink. Not because it disappears, but because it's no longer the center of your world. Cheap dopamine is about escaping the self. True purpose is about transcending the self, and that shift is what creates real fulfillment. So fixing anxiety, honoring the goodness in men, and beating cheap dopamine are not separate topics. They are the same battle. They are all about reclaiming your mind, your body, your attention, and your purpose. They are about moving from survival to creation, from distraction to discipline, from isolation to connection. This is not easy work. It's not instant, but it is possible. And every step you take rewires your brain, reshapes your story, and reclaims your life. So, when we talk about fixing anxiety, I want to really pause here and acknowledge something most people miss. Anxiety is not just a random malfunction in your brain. It is a protective mechanism. It's your body's way of preparing you for danger, uncertainty, or rejection. The issue is that modern life creates constant triggers without providing a healthy release or resolution. So instead of encountering one lion in the savannah, fighting it off, and then resting, your brain is facing dozens of micro-lions every single day. Emails, financial stress, dating uncertainty, self-comparison, social media. And because there's no clear moment of victory or closure, the anxiety never shuts off. It just cycles and compounds. Now, fixing your anxiety doesn't mean erasing it. It means learning how to relate to it differently. The first mistake people make is treating anxiety like an enemy that has to be destroyed. But if you think about it, anxiety has been keeping humans alive for thousands of years. It's the reason you check if the stove is off. It's the reason you prepare for exams instead of walking in blind. The problem comes when anxiety is overactivated, when the volume knob gets stuck at max. So the real skill is not how do I get rid of anxiety, but how do I teach my body that it doesn't need to scream every time I walk into a room or open my inbox? And this is where we need to address the red pill space. Because in those communities, men often hear the message that anxiety is weakness. That if you feel anxious before approaching a girl, before starting a business, before speaking up at work, that's evidence you're not alpha enough. And that conditioning is poison. It creates this extra layer of shame where not only are you anxious, but now you're anxious about being anxious. And what happens when you shame an emotion? It doesn't go away, it just buries itself deeper, and then it shows up as irritability, anger, or numbing behaviors. This is why I actually think men in the red pill space are pointing at something true. Men are hurting. They're anxious, they're lost. But the solution isn't crush your emotions and dominate. The solution is learning how to integrate those emotions, to understand them, to master them not through suppression but through awareness. Men aren't broken for feeling. Men aren't weak for caring. Men don't need to reject their humanity to be strong. In fact, the strongest men are the ones who can sit with their own anxiety, acknowledge it, and still move forward with intention. Now, let's talk about cheap dopamine, because this is where the cycle often spirals. If you're anxious, what do? You reach for something that soothes the discomfort. Scroll TikTok, watch YouTube, fire up a game, order food, jerk off. Each of those things delivers a little hit of dopamine, and for a moment, you feel better. The anxiety quiets. But the cost is that you're training your brain to avoid instead of resolve. Over time, your threshold for discomfort drops lower and lower. Something that used to just be a small challenge now feels unbearable because your nervous system has lost its ability to tolerate tension. That's why people say, I want to start a business, but I just can't get myself to sit down and do it. Or, I know I should go to the gym, but I just feel paralyzed. It's not laziness. It's not weakness. It's that your brain has been conditioned to avoid tension and chase cheap relief. So when faced with a big task, your nervous system basically says, nope, too painful, let's grab a quick hit instead. That's why porn feels easier than dating. That's why scrolling feels easier than working. That's why daydreaming feels easier than planning. The loop is perfectly designed to keep you trapped. So how do you beat cheap dopamine? The answer isn't quit everything cold turkey or just have more willpower. That's another trap of self-improvement culture. You don't brute force your way out of a nervous system loop. You train it, slowly, incrementally, and most importantly, compassionately. What does that mean? Let's say you want to stop scrolling. Instead of saying, I'm never touching my phone again, try building tolerance for micro discomforts. The next time you feel the urge to check, just wait 30 seconds before picking it up. Not 5 hours, 30 seconds. In those 30 seconds, you are rewiring your brain. You are teaching your nervous system that it can survive discomfort without collapse. The more reps you do, the stronger that tolerance becomes. Over time, 30 seconds becomes a minute becomes 5, and suddenly you realize you don't need the quick hit anymore. This is also why meditation is such a powerful tool. People think meditation is about calming down, but it's actually about learning to sit with discomfort without immediately escaping. You watch your thoughts, your urges, your anxiety. You don't fight them, but you don't feed them either. That practice directly strengthens the exact muscle you need to break free of cheap dopamine loops. It's not about being spiritual. It's about literally rewiring your nervous system. Now, I want to bring this back to men and the way society conditions them. Because when you look at anxiety, shame, and cheap dopamine, what you're really seeing is a feedback loop created by disconnection. Men are disconnected from their emotions, disconnected from authentic community, and disconnected from real purpose. So when those needs go unmet, they fill the void with cheap substitutes, porn instead of intimacy, hustle porn instead of purpose, online tribes instead of brotherhood. None of this makes men bad. It just makes them human beings living in a world that doesn't give them the tools to thrive. Fixing anxiety isn't just about personal practices. It's also about changing the narrative. When a man shares his struggles, he doesn't need to be told to man up. He needs someone to actually listen. When a man feels ashamed of being anxious, he doesn't need another hack. He needs permission to be human. And when a man is stuck in the cheap dopamine loop, he doesn't need to be shamed for being weak. He needs to be shown that there's a path out and that small, consistent steps are enough to get there. So here's the deeper truth. You don't fix anxiety by fighting it. You don't fix cheap dopamine by deleting everything. You don't fix shame by pretending you don't care. You fix these things by building the skill of awareness, tolerance, and connection. You learn to tolerate discomfort. You learn to connect with emotions. You learn to connect with other people who can support you. And when you put all of those together, you create a nervous system that can handle life without collapsing. That's the foundation of real confidence. That's what allows you to build, to risk, to love. And maybe the most important piece of this is giving yourself permission to go slow. Real healing isn't overnight. The internet has tricked you into thinking you need to be a millionaire at 25, jacked at 26, enlightened at 27, and happily married at 28. But life doesn't work that way. Growth is not linear. Sometimes you'll fall back into the loop. Sometimes the anxiety will flare up. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human. And the real measure of success is not, did I fix everything perfectly? But, am I learning to relate to myself with more compassion and resilience? Because that mindset will carry you through the valleys and the peaks. So, if you're re-listening to this and you feel stuck in the loop of anxiety and cheap dopamine, I want you to hear this. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not doomed. What you re-experiencing is the result of a nervous system doing its best to survive in a world that constantly overwhelms it. And with awareness, practice, and community, you can retrain that system. You can break the loop. You can live a life where anxiety doesn't run the show, where dopamine comes from real fulfillment, and where being a man doesn't mean rejecting your humanity, but embracing it fully.